Okay, so this video is a good one. It is one I'm very excited to make and I've wanted to make for a long time. I'm a huge fan of kickboxing, and a lot of people don't know the actual history that led to one of the best styles of kickboxing, arguably two of the best styles of kickboxing, Japanese kickboxing and Dutch kickboxing. I always thought they were directly from Muay Thai, but in this video we'll take a deep dive into the roots and untold story over the father of kickboxing. So stay tuned.
Pow pow, inside fighting, yeah, dangerous martial arts. Pow pow, ooh ah.
Okay, so to jump into this, we gotta go back in time pretty far. And oddly enough, a style that I very much love, the first video I ever made on this channel was about a style called Kyokushin, which is a kind of karate, bare knuckle, full contact karate, knockdown karate, tough guy karate. And like I said, I'm a fan of it. And what's super interesting to me is I never knew the connection between Kyokushin and kickboxing, Dutch kickboxing and Japanese kickboxing. So I'm here today to share the story with all of you. So starting from scratch, in the late 1950s, there's this guy, Noguchi. Noguchi was a boxing promoter, and he really wanted to raise Japanese pride and set up fights between Japanese fighters and people from other countries. He ended up choosing Thailand because Muay Thai was a very interesting style to him. Initially, he wanted to use boxers, but he realized they would get their asses whooped because they don't knee, they don't elbow, they don't kick, and they wouldn't know how to deal with the Thais. So in his head, he thought it would be very smart to go to karate guys because they had all these techniques in their system. And he went to Masoyama. Masoyama is the founder of Kyokushin. Kyokushin is a very strong system of karate. It's bare knuckle fighting. And so it was a nice matchup, especially if you look at Masoyama's mentality at the time, this kind of tough guy mentality, to go against the Thais in the Lumpini Stadium. And so the fights were initially set up for 1963. Kenji Kurosaki is one of the people who trained with Masoyama from day one. Started with him in Goju-Ryu Karate, ended up becoming a 7th Dan in Kyokushin, from what I understand, and he was going to help coach the guys who were going to go fight. There were 5 people who were supposed to go to Thailand. Kenji was one of them. There's mixed information here, but according to what I've read, he wasn't even supposed to fight. He was kind of there to coach or be an alternate for them. And what happens along the way is between 1963, for reasons I do not know, I found so many conflicting explanations to this. They do not fight until 1964. So the planned time period for them to fight was 1963. Things get postponed to 1964, and 2 fighters drop out. So the end of the situation here is that they didn't want to just have 2 fighters fight in the Lumpini Stadium. Felt weird, so they asked Kenji Kurosaki to step in. So he did not train to fight for these fights in the Lumpini Stadium. He was the alternate, and he stepped in on short notice. The other 2 fighters are Akio Fujihara and Tadeshi Nakamura, whose names I probably butchered just now. I apologize. And here's the interesting thing. Back in the day, Kyokushin, and if you look at my first video on Kyokushin, I'm a huge fan of Kyokushin, but I do think there was something wonderful about it back in the day, which is that most Kyokushin fighters had black belts in Judo. And I think that as a supplemental style to Kyokushin, Judo is fantastic. If you're gonna tell me you're gonna create a style that's bare knuckle, because you wanna make it different than gloved systems, but you're not gonna allow gripping, you're not gonna allow throwing, then that's a weird rule set for me. And if you look at offshoots of Kyokushin, like Ashihara, like Enshin, like Kudo, I think they're far more complete. Kudo definitely, it's like full-on MMA, it's the same thing as MMA pretty much, just with a gi on and those cool helmets. And they headbutt each other, so they're, a little bit different. But Enshin and Ashihara are real demonstrations of what pure Kyokushin with throwing and taisabaki techniques looks like. Taisabaki meaning you're stepping out of the way, there's more angular footwork. It's not as, I'm gonna square off with you, which is the Kyokushin mentality, and tough guy this and pushed you back just with punches. So I think old school Kyokushin had a little bit more of the understanding that gripping and throwing when you're in the pocket like that is a functional tool, and they probably implemented it more in their class sparring. I say this because when they went to the Lumpini Stadium to fight the Thais, one of the rules that they made sure they had was that they were allowed to do takedowns. Now, a criticism I hear a lot from Thai guys is The only reason they won is because they allowed takedowns. Now, to me, not to be offensive, it's a stupid criticism, because the more techniques you allow in a fight, the closer it is to reality, the more of a demonstration of which style is superior it would be. Now, what happened here is that Kenji Kurosaki was not even supposed to fight. Because the other two fighters dropped out, Kenji stepped in, and so you had 3 fights take place. They both won their fights. They won their fights, I believe, by knockout, but if you look at the tapes, they did do takedowns along the way. Now, Kenji Kurosaki, he lost because he got elbowed in the face. Now, again, there's a fair argument to be made here that is a limitation of Kyokushin, just like takedowns are a limitation of Muay Thai. Now, what I love about Kenji Kurosaki is he said, okay, I got knocked out by an elbow, instead of just ignoring the reality of what happened, which so many martial artists do. I say this all the time. I've had martial artists who have had 20 years training, and they come train BJJ with me, and they were stand-up guys. And this has happened to me over the years. So they say, oh, you know, in their heads, I'm not a huge guy. I'm not 6'8", and I'm just going to control them on the ground because they have 20 years stand-up experience. They believe they're tough. And when it comes down to ground fighting, if you don't train it, you don't know it, you will get destroyed. You'll get demolished. Now, there's 2 reactions that happen every time I do this to someone. Every time I've seen this happen, anytime you have a high-level grappler fight a high-level striker and they get demolished on the ground, 2 reactions can take place. They justify it. Oh, well, you know, if I was allowed to eye gouge, if I was allowed to use my techniques, which like throat grabbing or spitting in your face or whatever it is, I would have won the fight. And so it's a form of denial. And tacked on to that, I would say some of them just go into straight denial and just ignore it even happened. Or the other reaction, which I have some good friends that have done this and now are black belts or on their way to being black belts, is that they jump in full speed ahead. And those 20 years of experience that they had don't go to waste because they're hyper athletic, they understand timing, they understand distance, they understand what it means to be a fighter, so it all complements their ability to grapple. So Kenji Kurosaki is a prime example of how losing a fight can stem into the greatest thing that can happen to you and one of the greatest things that can happen to martial arts. Now, I think it's very sad that people don't talk about this more. This story of Kenji Kurosaki losing his fight is probably one of the most foundationally important fights in combat sports history, because it leads Kenji to reevaluate his style. And he ends up going back to Masoyama and having discussions with him. And because of the differentiating rule sets between Kyokushin and Muay Thai that he felt limited Kyokushin, he said, I'm going to go and start a new style of fighting. Now, interestingly enough, kickboxing had already been coined by Noguchi, the promoter, but he goes and he starts a gym called the Majiro Gym. And the Majiro Gym in Japan has a sister gym in Europe. The Majiro Gym in Europe is the gym that founded Dutch kickboxing. And if you look, Kenji Kurosaki is responsible for training guys like Jan Plas, John Blooming, who are like the foundational figures of Dutch kickboxing. He also goes on to train some of the best Japanese kickboxers in history that then went on to go beat Thai fighters. And I will talk about those guys in another video. There's one fighter specifically, and there's such cool stories around that too. So Dutch kickboxing and Japanese kickboxing are directly contributed, oddly enough, to Kenji Kurosaki, which if you look at a direct lineage is heavily influenced by Kyokushin. And I love that. I love that people don't know that Kyokushin is such a huge part of Dutch kickboxing. Even myself, I always looked at Dutch kickboxing, which I feel is one of the best, if not the best, combat striking art that there is. Now, I'll say in modern times, I do again contribute things like Sanda because of the native takedown approach within the style, the fluidity of that, to be incredible, arguably better than something like Dutch kickboxing. But from a strictly striking standpoint, you look at guys like Raymond Deckers, you look at some of these old school Dutch kickboxers, the aggression, the forward mentality, the kind of sequence of how they strike, the combination patterns of just endless forward pressure are beautiful and amazing, and the perfect storm of where aggression meets technique, which meets perfect destruction in martial arts. And it took me a long time to research this and realize, well, that mentality, that approach, those kicks, that forward pressure is a fundamental Kyokushin mentality. And that's where that came from. Whereas the Thais have a more fluid mentality a lot of time, which is very beautiful too. If you look at how they spar, it's more playful. And when they fight, they're vicious, but there's a playful nature to it. There's a more counter nature to it. And so I love the story of the untold kind of history of how Kyokushin losing two Thai fighters. 1 out of 3 fights. If you look at that event, arguably you would contribute 2 out of the 3 fights to Kyokushin. But again, people will have, I know there's going to be people in the comment section being like, yeah, well, the Japanese were way bigger. Yeah, well, the Japanese paid off the fighters. Yeah, well, the Japanese this, the Japanese that. Listen, watch the fights. They're great. I have some videos of it in this video. And make a decision for yourself. But it shows how martial arts can evolve. It shows how losing can actually make you a better fighter and can actually change martial arts for good. Some of my favorite fighters, losing a fight led them to become better fighters significantly. And I think people should know more about the history of the martial arts they're doing. I think it's just nice for people to know that when they go into a Dutch kickboxing gym, they understand what Dutch kickboxing is. They understand the lineage of it, which traces back to Japan, which is then influenced also by Thai fighting, and that there's a beautiful collaboration there. And the same thing for Japanese kickboxing. And then when you're training your Kyokushin, you understand that it's contributed to these other things. It's just so much more rich and beautiful that way. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Kenji Kurosaki, as a martial artist, is the founder of Mijiro Gym, and again, its sister gym, which is also Mijiro Gym, which deserve way more accolades, way more historical recognition for their contribution to martial arts. And in small circles, they have it. But again, I think it just, if I could get this out there, I think it's kind of a cool story to share. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned the connection between Kyokushin to modern day kickboxing and you found it interesting. Again, the only thing I wish these styles had more of, and you find it in things like Ashihara, Sanda, Enshin, Kudo, Combat Sambo, is integrating takedowns into their combat systems. But rule sets make styles, rule sets make the martial art in the end of the day, and they chose their rule set to be based on this, which is why you have that rich variety of styles, why you have Kyokushin, which is strictly bare knuckle to the body, and why you have Dutch kickboxing, which is vicious, forward pressure kind of style, and where you have Muay Thai with clinching more. Just creates more variety. It's beautiful. So hopefully you enjoyed. Like and subscribe, by the way. I'm gonna say like and subscribe earlier on in the video now too. I'm just reminding myself. I'm gonna put it in, and hope you enjoyed this video and share it. And there you go.